What is a woman? A, a woman is whoever she says she is. I'm literally picking a fight with a lot of African moms and dads. And most of all, this is a direct provocation to the evangelists and a lot of religious leaders. Let me go straight to the point. No wasting time. I think that the way society attempts to define sex and gender is very much inadequate, defining men and women exclusively by individual genitals or reproductive organs or ability to conceive or chromosomes or gametes simply doesn't work. So before you come into the comment sections with countless Bible verses explaining how God created a man and a woman, not two men or two women, or how he created Adam and Eve and not Adam and Steve, I want to make something clear here. We can debate this according to religion or according to what community does and why, or according to what does and doesn't work in the society or any other ground. But here I'm talking about pure science, biology. First of all, I'll make some few concepts perfectly clear so we can refer to them as necessary from here moving forward. Sex refers to a suite of physical characteristics possessed by an organism like you and me. Most humans have pair of chromosomes as well as primary and secondary characteristics, and that will include genitals and other reproductive organs. And more often than never, the sex chromosomes corresponds with the anatomical features. But sometimes they don't, and other times these anatomical features exhibit intermediary characteristics. Human development is very complex, relying on tightly coordinated sequence of gene expressions and signaling molecules called hormones. We have more than two genotypes and more than two phenotypes that can be associated with sex. For example, there are the standard genotypes that most of us only consider during arguments. These ones are the XX, which typically develops into a female, and XY, which typically develops into a male. But we can have other variations like XO, which is an indication of Turner syndrome, XXY, an indication of Klinefelter syndrome, XYY, an indication of Jacob syndrome, XXX, which is an indication of trisomy X, and others that you might be looking at on your screen, which tells us clearly that sex cannot be binary. A lot of people have hard times accepting these facts, but science doesn't care. It's biological fact. Gender is another word, but this one is so diverse according to different cultures. But gender identity is one of its components, which also have biological implications. However, it is not chromosomal, but rather predominant in neural anatomical. So, it is biological okay for someone to claim to have an experience of being a male or a female, and this correlate with brain structure. Masculinization and feminization occurs in the brain just as they do everywhere else in the body, and mostly during embryonic development. Since genital differentiates in the first trimester and the brain becomes imprinted in the latter half of gestation, it is very much possible for fetal brain to be printed differently from the genitals. Most of the time, gender identity matches with sex, therefore producing what we call a cis person. But there are times and instances in which they don't match. That is when you find someone is assigned male sex at birth but possesses female gender identity, or assigned female sex at birth but possesses male gender identity, and that is now what we call a trans person. Another thing here is language. First of all, words are made up. We humans look at the world and make up sounds in an attempt to compartmentalize our experiences and communicate them. And sometimes these words change and they are subject to revision if and when they become imprecise. Woman is one such word. Woman, it means whatever we say it does, just like any other word in any other language, ever. And since becoming aware of transness, the word woman has come to mean any adult of a female gender identity, of which most of them are also female sex. Trans woman is an individual who was born of a male sex. All the experts in this area will thump me up. Those who complain of trans people changing gender or changing sex are confused about what sex and gender identity are. Trans people are born with sex gender identity that do not align, and because of this, they experience something called gender dysphoria, which is highly distressing, and going through puberty with gender identity that does not match sex is a complete nightmare. That is why these young guys have high proportion of suicidal attempts, especially in Africa, where no one ever takes a step to understand them. Everyone is so lazy, no one even tries to lift a finger and try to learn anything about this topic, including governments. Well, you might disagree with my earlier statement when I said that a woman is whoever she says she is. But perhaps the more accurate way to put it is to say that a woman is whoever we say she is. And that is an adult individual of female gender identity, which includes trans women in addition to cis women. Likewise, a man refers to an adult individual of male gender identity, and also that includes cis men and trans men as well. And anyone who disagrees indeed does not understand language and science that relates to this field, and so they should not even attempt to engage in these types of conversations. People who object these facts say things like gender is a fact, or men can't have babies, or you can't change your gender, and all these are willful ignorance. Gender is a fact means nothing. Yes, gender itself factfully exists, and part of it is gender identity, which we now know for a fact that it does not always align with sex. Men can't have babies is a very wrong statement, since they mean either cis men or trans women, and of course no one thinks they can have babies. But they are ignoring trans men, who of course can have babies since they have uteruses. You cannot change your gender. Now this one is purely lack of knowledge. No one is changing their gender here. Trans people are not changing their gender. Most of them alter their primary and secondary sexual characteristics to align with the gender identity that they have had since birth, in order to minimize gender dysphoria and be happier. The problem is that not any of a lot of people even lift their finger to get past some harmful propaganda in these topics. I'm sure that there will be at least one person who, even after all this explanation, will still comment ignorantly just because they don't want to align themselves with the real science. Sometimes even the people we consider as experts get it completely wrong, and that takes great part in misunderstanding this topic.
In your estimation, Professor, is there any way for a biological man to become a woman?
No. They can say they're a woman, and I will respect their self-identification to the extent of using she and their preferred pronouns, but as a biologist, no.
This is why discussion with transform doesn't go anywhere.
Because the biological definition of sex is based on the reproductive apparatus that can produce either sperm or eggs.
That guy is a professor, but very clueless. Does he mean that a woman without an ovary is not a woman, or a man without testicles is not a man? This boxer here is from Liberia. I'm sure you've heard of her. She has XY chromosome, but she was born with female genitals and reproductive organs. How do you explain this then? It is true that you can be born with XY chromosome but have female genital, or born with XX chromosome but have male genitals. That is why neither a chromosomal or gonadal definition for sex is sufficient, because they can contradict each other. A lot of people argue that sex is binary based on gametes, like sperms or ovule. If I understand them well, they will have to be meaning that in order to know whether or not a person is a man or a woman, all you need to do is see what gamete a person is producing, and that's it. That will tell you if it is a male or a female, right? Well, not so fast, unless that is what they do in the hospitals. When the baby is born, they check for eggs or sperms. And we know that's not what they do, since testes do not produce sperms until puberty. Also, if that argument is to be considered, that will mean that toddlers' boys are not male. As I said, sex is not binary. Sex is very broad, and it considers a broad sequence of physiological and anatomical characteristics from the molecular to the anatomical level, including hormones, genitals, chromosomes, gonads, reproductive organs, and secondary sexual characteristics. To claim that sex is binary is to say that all these features exist exclusively, that are totally unmodifiable, which is very, very wrong. There are a lot of people who experience a lot of intermediacy in these characteristics, positive and negative electric charge that is binary, matter and antimatter pair of particles that is binary. But human biology does not have binary, and anyone who says otherwise is clueless on how immensely complex living organisms are. A lot of people who I have tried to debate with about this topic, mostly they take me to Google Dictionary or Oxford Dictionary. But I'm repeating this again. The word woman is not the same with biological characteristics we associate with female sex. You can dispute about how this word is widely used, but you cannot change the characterization. Language might not change, but our understanding grows. That is a change. And if language does change as a result of new scientific understanding, it will show up in the Oxford Dictionary, not in primary scientific literature. A class 2 dropout should know that. In that case, when I say a man or a woman, that is language, and it's made up. They mean whatever we say they mean. So biological women to me might mean nothing in an argument, because science and language might contradict, and they have most of the time. But if we must, I must also point out that then gender identity is also biological. The fact that trans women experience female gender identity is biological. The only thing that is not biological here is whether we as society choose to call them women or not. That is the only thing in this conversation that is not biological. A lot of loud-mouthed people who disagree with these biological facts ask questions like,
why should me and other women like me have to put up with competing against men or having men in our locker rooms, men in our restroom, because it makes a very, very small segment of the population feel better about themselves? Why do their feelings trump the feelings of women?
Yeah.
That's what I don't understand in this argument, in this debate.
Look, I don't even know what to reply on this. If there are cis women who feel uncomfortable changing around trans women, although I have never had anyone bringing these complaints, what should they do then? We should create a world where we all accept reality regarding trans people. We accept that sex and gender identity are different and that neither of them are binary. And the world that nobody ever asks, what is a woman? Ever again. In that world, it will be possible to sit down and have mature discussions about what to do with these social issues. Sometimes the most loud-mouthed people in this matter are really inaccurate, and they just spit words to make sure that trans people are printed negatively.
free speech is saying what you want to say. It's also hearing what you don't want to hear. There's plenty on these so-called free speech platforms that I don't like to see. I don't like to see transgenderism pushed on children, but unfortunately that's been in existence on Meta platforms and on TikTok.
Ah, yes, the children. As if trans rights activists aren't specifically thinking of trans youth who regularly kill themselves in order to combat all this insanity. There are thousands of researchers around the world that are actively researching on the relationship between gender identity and neural anatomy on a daily basis, but media personalities are not willing to invite them to participate in panels that are hugely televised. I agree that some of them might not be willing to appear because they are painfully aware of the harassment they will receive from the society, starting with the evangelical propagandists. Yet they pretend that trans rights activists are the ones who does the harassing. Listen to this uninformed loudmouth.
That's very silly.
Pierce, there's no such thing as a trans kid. That's child abuse. When you take somebody who's still growing up, figuring out who they are, doesn't know anything about sexuality and shouldn't at that young age, and you try to convince them that there's something other than what they were born to be, that's a problem. It's child abuse.
Hey Dambas, trans people are born trans, just like gay people are born gay. You are pretending that they just appear out of thin air in adolescent. Also, nobody is convincing anybody of anything. Trans kids discover and express their transness. It is so stupid to think that parents of trans kids are trying to make them trans on purpose, as if that is something you can do first of all, and as if anyone will willingly invite this shit of harassment on both of them and their children. These kind of people should be slapped whenever they try to open their loud mouth because they are making it impossible for trans youth to get the care they need to not want to kill themselves. It should be clear that there are issues that need to be discussed regarding the acceptance and integration of trans people into every aspect of social life. About trans people in sports, I think that there are instances that are unfair. And some instances it is completely fair depending on the type of transness. About the locker room thing or changing room thing, however you call them, I personally do not see this as pressing issue. But if some people are not comfortable changing near a trans person, then why don't we have our locker rooms installed private stalls rather than open changing area? Most people prefer that anyway. My final is this. We are biological creatures, so biology first, the rest comes after. I'm Karakimanchi. Guest 10.